ultimately, our decision to go into television is something that Tanya and I have wanted to be doing all our careers. In fact, it's one of the first things that we wished to do when we got into this entertainment industry in New Zealand. But it's really taken us this long to be able to have the infrastructure around us and give us the confidence that we could pursue our own product. We've always wanted to make our own things so that ultimately we were getting to play with our own train set. We weren't having to go off and play with someone else's. And television is a far lesser risk, ultimately, financially, than trying to get a film off the ground. There's a much greater ability through the episodic quality of television to tell an ongoing story, to journey through a universe much bigger than the one that you could possibly create in an hour and a half on a feature film. And also you can touch many more people. The ability for television to reach out and find an audience amongst the children of the world is incredibly appealing. And people have often asked us from the lofty heights of Lord of the Rings, why children's television? And it really is because we can own it ourselves, we can make it ourselves, and we'll ride on the successes or failings of our creativity with this show in partnership with our colleagues, and we can tell our own stories to the world.
Is you go from the script, you put together a storyboard, you then record the sound, do a Leica, they then go to a layout, and layouts are a process where you really work the whole show through. And we're discovering, aren't we, that this process actually allows for some extra freedom, some extra possibilities that could change the workflow essentially. Well, how is that being looked at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing the workflow dramatically. It's certainly for the folks at Nelvana who have been making television for, at least more than 25 years, and we've got a pipeline here that nobody back there has ever seen before. It's completely new. And really interesting for a lot of people back there, and there's a lot of eyes on it because it's such a new idea. And the big difference is the fact that because we're capturing off the floor, we can set our cameras for the shots, but we'll actually take the complete run of a scene from those various camera angles, then go into edit, and we're able to grab any part of that scene from any of those cameras to do our edit. And it's a real hybrid of live action, animation, and very, very interesting. Creatively, it's fantastic.
Television is such a new venture. The actual process of what to make, when to make, how to make it, why not live action?
Well, it was really the fact that you came along with the show that you did. We were totally open to live action. In fact, we've been developing a large number of live action television shows with a business partner. It just happened that the show that you came along with was best achieved as a digitally animated television show. And we ultimately wanted to together realize your original illustrations. And animation proved to be, or a digital process proved to be the best way to realize that world. And of course, when we met Trevor together and realized that Trevor could actually bring that technology to the fore and realize your coloring in pencil illustrations from your book, we were off to the races. And I think it's fair to say, Trevor, that it was the challenge of bringing those pencil-drawn images to life that snagged you on that first day.
Absolutely, and that was why I got involved in the project. The chance to take an art book and make it move and do something in CG that wasn't trying to copy reality, wasn't trying to just make a creature, but to actually come up with a whole new look, develop a look, make it work. And it was an incredibly challenging one to make work.
One of the things I was so certain of was that if we created our first animated children's television show with digital technology, it mustn't feel of the technology of that moment. It had to feel timeless. if Weta Workshop, through its new company Weta Productions, was getting into television production, it had to be the most beautiful television we possibly could make. And that's what your illustrations challenged us with, to try and realize that timeless illustrative quality of those original illustrations and bring them to life. And something that Trevor and I talked about at length in those first couple of weeks was, let's not create that hard-edged, shiny bathtub toy CG look.
And yeah, and certainly the look that you've created fit very well with the idea of a series that would be placed in a medieval setting. You know, the going for a slick sort of computer look would be in contrast with the type of series that it was.
And that's one of the other things, isn't it? There's a lot of television is of its era. You can actually look back on shows and you can almost place them in a time frame, can't you, in terms of the style of the show, the look of the show, the content of the show. And the hope is that Jane and the Dragon will live on, that it will become a kind of a timeless classic. Actually, it's almost a sleight of hand. We've tried to create something that doesn't look modern and doesn't look clever, so that children aren't actually taken in by the bells and whistles of the show, are they? They actually just embrace the world and get in
Hopefully
there.
just accepting of the world, because the world that we've created digitally complements the worlds they already know through their illustrative children's books, and in turn don't need to analyse the cleverness, the slickness, as you say, of the world, but just accept it, and then in turn allow the stories to take their place in that world and buy into the stories, into the morals and the fables that are being told.
I mean, you don't want a look that is drawing attention to itself. You know, it's drawing you away from the stories. It's drawing you away from the world. It's, you know, everybody's looking at it and going, "Well, how did they do that?" Yeah. You know, it shouldn't be that. I mean, it should be something you sort of recognize and you feel comfortable with. And like you say, it's that illustration feeling. It's what kids are familiar with.
One of the interesting processes is to grow something from a very small book that's really just a few characters in an isolated environment telling a tight story, to expand that to something that can live for 26 half-hour episodes in a very rich environment was a very interesting process, wasn't it, Richard? Because it was also a process that for me was very exciting, because you put together a team of designers who actually weren't just designing, they were creating the show as they were designing it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's something that Peter Jackson allows our design department to be involved in, which is the storytelling process through illustration. He doesn't come to us with a hard lockdown script and says design that. Through a collective process of illustration and design and sculpting, the world unfolds, and it bounces to and fro from the writers to the designers to the actors to the cast, the crew, and all of this collaborates to make the most beautiful film at the end. And our design team were of that mentality when you came and first saw us and verbalized the world of Jane. And so therefore they were prepared and eager to be an integral part in the storytelling process. Let's just make the world together. Let's discover it as we journey through it. To think that we've done more illustrative design for the world of Jane than we did on Lord of the Rings. But if you think about it, we were designing 9 hours of Lord of the Rings. We're designing 26 hours over 2 years of Jane. So the world has to be very real, intense, focused and believable in the eyes of the children.
And what for me has been the proof of the pudding in all that hard work of all those designers, and not just designing the individual elements, but conceiving the world in its entirety, in terms of we built a virtual, a low-resolution virtual world of the castle, so that we could travel through from one set to another through windows. We could look at sight lines, we could look at travel lines, we could see how the stories would arrive at Jane and how the different characters could see dramatic events taking place in other parts of the castle. And by conceiving that in a great amount of detail with a team of designers who'd worked with film sensibilities and live action sensibilities, who actually thought in terms of the action through space, meant that we weren't just designing isolated objects that lived in a vacuum. They were all contributing to a world that was rich with movement and inhabited by real people. Where we placed the forge within the yard for Smithy's Yard, where we placed Jane's Castle in relationship to the other sets, was well conceived by a whole team of people.
As we got into it, that was sort of a fun part of the process, to actually take all that material and then start to let it evolve, into the series that we have. And Richard, you were talking about the different contributions from the different parts of the designers, and that sort of continues, because the writers bring things to the table, the voice actors bring things to the table, so the characters, it's almost at that point where you've got a couple of shows recorded, and a couple of storyboards done, where you go, okay, now we know who these characters are.
All of this was possible because the designers felt empowered by the fact there was no restrictions from the technical department. Trevor sat only a few paces away from the design studio, and rather than stalling the design process by going, hang on a moment, individual leaves on a cabbage, not possible, or waving corn in the field, you've got to be joking. It was more the process of, see what we come up with, find what's beautiful, find what's necessary to paint the world of Jane into a believable and character-filled world, and then I'll have a go and solve how to do it.
If you need to let designers design, then try and figure out a way to do it. Until I can see an image, it's really hard to say how I'm going to achieve something, even if they just describe it to me. So as soon as you can see visually what you need to reproduce, then you can start making calls on whether it's possible or not.
And it's really interesting, the team that came together as the designers. We had people that had worked for many years on Lord of the Rings. We had others that joined us at the beginning of the project that had worked with Martin before.
I mean, one of the things that we noticed is that the boys wanted to design the armour and the weapons, and we were getting a lot of crazy drawings of wonderful, weird weaponry and contraptions and things. And when we came to the beautiful costumes and the beautiful hair, it was Rebecca again and again. It was Rebecca and John Craney, who were coming up with beautiful costume designs and costume elements. And the great joy was actually being able to see and allow those enrichment aspects to take place. It wasn't like saying, what are the costumes of Jane's world? It was actually discovering and allowing each person to contribute and bring that in. And
one of the interesting things has been the disproportionality of our characters to human characters. Some of them are quite close, some of them are not. Our lead character, Jane, has incredibly long legs for her body height, and all of these things, when you motion capture a normally proportioned human person, transfer that motion on, all of the angles of the joints get transferred, but that means that the legs don't quite meet the ground, and that all has to be retargeted, remapped onto our characters. We have software that can do that. What that means in terms of shooting mocap is that we have different scales. If Jane walks 3 feet played by one actor, then somebody the same height played by a different actor actually walks 5 feet, and even though they walk the same distance on the stage. And so we start getting into various technical scenarios on how we deal with that, how we deal with eye lines. If 2 actors are different heights but their characters that they're being transferred onto are the same height, then where do they look when they're performing? What angle are their heads on? So we've had to look at all of those aspects of it as well.
The mocap material was being used as the basis, and it would be adding a certain reality and life to the characters, and then afterwards we would go in with the keyframe animation and just take it to that next level, and to me that made complete sense from everything that I had seen before. And a bit of a balancing act on this one, because we have the dragon, who obviously isn't going to be motion capture. He's going to be keyframe, and we want to avoid a heavy contrast between the way he moves and the way the rest of the world moves. So it's been a bit of a job in terms of tweaking the way the actors move, to bring them a little closer to animation type timing, so that we can easily integrate those two elements.
The great challenge that faces us is we want to make high quality, near film quality television at cost effective prices here in New Zealand. Come up with the technology, because it couldn't be done at that point with the technology that was available to us, with animation, even motion capture as it was being used at the time.
The technology at the time, motion capture was just about there. We were seeing stuff that was being done at the studio already that was promising, but it was also being done in a way that motion capture has always been done, which is as a service. The animation department goes in and wants this piece of movement and this piece of movement, and they do whatever's necessary to get that piece of movement, and then that goes off to motion editing and gets cleaned up and then adjusted. And sometimes in the end it's almost slower than animation, sometimes it's not. If you're doing a large bulk of it, it was worth it, which is what made it worth doing. Doing motion capture in that way would never have worked for this production. Doing traditional animation on such a complex show with so many characters for a 22-minute show would have required, at the level we want to be at, would have required far more animators than we could have ever attracted to this country, to this project, and would have cost far more than we would have budget for. And just having been on live action sets, seeing how they worked, seeing how a crew worked, and because motion capture had its own technical issues but essentially was shooting live actors, I just started looking at the possibility of shooting motion capture as live action. And that's the road we took, and that's the road that is through the next room working today. And what made that feasible was the ability to get our motion capture happening in real time, the motion being transferred onto low-res representations of our characters in real time and displayed for the director so that he could frame shots, see the performance, and buy a shot as if he was on a live stage.
With multiple characters. In the real world.
And within the sets, that's right.
Suddenly it becomes a matter of directing a drama similar to Coronation Street than directing a animation piece such as Shrek. You're directing a cast performing a show rather than directing a performer getting you one little snippet of motion.